I've set up an event, by the way.
Okay, I saw it. Hello, everybody. Today we're talking about AI and everything else that's sparked a lot of interesting conversations on LinkedIn this month. It's been a while since we did this format. How are you doing, Adrian? You're dressed very well, I have to say.
Yeah,
Are,
but I'm at the wrong spot
aren't you
right now.
aren't you supposed to be at Cloudfest?
Yes, but I'll probably go tomorrow then.
So you've had so much. We're gonna roll the intro, by the way, in a moment. Did you have so much fun programming with Claude that you decided to not go to Cloudfest?
Exactly, it was so fun to I was just sitting there on the couch, I was dreaming of code, and it was simply there. It was like,
All right,
can
let's
all
roll
go
the
home
intro.
now.
Let's roll the intro, and we'll see you in a few minutes. There we go. So let's jump in. Claude? Yes?
Claude Code. Yes, actually quite cool. So I think that was one of these situations where suddenly you start to rethink everything, right? So it's a little bit like, as I said in the video, so doing that for such a long time now, this development stuff, debugging, doing those kind of things. And then suddenly you see something doing that as well, but it's not a human. So you have this typical thing where humans laugh, right? As like a little bit like, doing that in development and these kind of issues I have. And it's sometimes so hard and weird to understand. And you see that when people then talk about AI, and some are totally like, oh, looking forward, and others really try to do everything, find every argument to blame AI for being garbage output creator in that moment. But when you really work with it, I mean really working with it, and not the type of I just ask ChatGPT for some bit of code. What I mean by that is really using sophisticated tools like Cloud Code and just spend some money. It's not for free. It's definitely not free, right? And but when you see what's possible, then you are. I can't my help other than being stunned, and that's what I said. And I met many other people in the last days who had the same experience. Others had different experiences, like a person who was working in Elixir. Somehow that tool doesn't work with Elixir at all. It's a little bit like it's not trained on that. I don't know exactly why. I don't use it myself. But in a typical TypeScript, Next.js, React environment, it basically works flawlessly if, and now the if thing, right?
Yeah.
If you have a good code quality already, if you have good patterns, if you have tests are actually pretty important. if you have a functioning type system, and what I mean by that is not having shallow types, like types which looks like that, but in runtime they are actually different, and you don't know that. Those kind of things are extremely important to understand. So when you have the right circumstances already prepared, and that's in your responsibility, in that moment it is basically a secret weapon. Today is a secret weapon. It won't be a secret weapon in the future. It would become it will become a standard, and it's just a matter of time now when it's available for the masses, let's say, because it's actually quite expensive. So if you have a fitting business model, probably in the Western world, it makes sense. So let's say you pay for an hour of coding is roughly about or between, let's say, $5 to $10. That is what it will cost you if you use it heavily together with what you do, right? And it's very important to understand we're not talking about vibe coding here, right? That is not vibe coding. That's I don't think even flow coding, because it is really like it is more the what we all wished for when we first saw ChatGPT, and it was so garbage, a little bit like you just ask something and it creates something out of no context, and it's oftentimes just a hit and miss thing. And
That's wishful thinking.
exactly, and Cloud Code and other tools like Windsurf probably as well. I haven't used it, but I speak for Cloud Code today now, working with that now for several days in production, so real production coding.
Yeah.
And what impresses me so much is that it actually thinks together with you. So you don't need to paste something into your IDE and then take a look what happens, and then you need to figure out yourself how to make it actually run. It does it for you. So it understands the system when it's well written. It basically tests, for example, the linter process, build process, it runs the tests and say, oh, the test is failing. I need to now adjust something in the code in order to get green again. And then it asks you, hey, I want to change this. This is the diff, and this is the reason why I want to change this. Oh, next step. And it's so funny when it then tells you like, oh, I found out that this actually is not working. Something is strange here. It really talks like this. It's really wondering why this is not working. It should work like a human, right? And then it basically goes for a explorative approach and tries to find out. Sometimes it even adds logs to the system, runs again and takes a look at the log. That's quite funny. That's pretty similar to how I code often, and probably most of us, right?
That's very interesting. I'm glad that you shared that.
And and then so it basically it finds a way until it works again.
What I found, so you opened up quite a few points there. So first of all, you started off with mentioning the price. You talked about, you said that it works well given certain constraints if your code base is already of high quality, and I imagine you being very experienced is also a factor. And then you mentioned you described your workflow, but what it's like using it, what it does, what surprised you. So you did actually a full 1 hour long video about this. Our viewers can find these links in YouTube and in Twitch chat. So it's your Substack article and YouTube video with the same name that is called AI Took Over My Next.js Migration. And there you go into a little bit more detail about what happened and how it basically ended up sort of positively surprising you. So anybody who wants to dig more into detail about what you actually did and how it helped with Next.js, and for those curious who don't even know what Claude looks like, to sort of see you using it, that's a great example. I've also added a link that came out, I think this article came out today. Yes. Which also talks about that other thing you mentioned about selection bias. Right? So
what you mean by other thing? Sorry.
So I linked two articles. One is your article. The other article that I linked is by Andrew McAfee. He's an MIT scientist. But this is on Azim's publication. Azim is his full name, Azim Ajjar. He's one of the more trading and AI leaning, trading, AI, economics, and sort of tech finance leaning authors on Substack. I've been following him for a while. What he mentions there is basically ways to gauge ROI of ROI of Gen AI usage, because he warns of selection bias. Right. So, and he has a great example of selection bias. In the footer, he actually mentioned even better examples of selection bias. One of the selection biases is what's the likelihood, what's the ROI of going to Harvard? Most people who graduate from Harvard will end up being rich. And, he mentioned it as a good example for selection bias because it's mostly the rich people who already go to Harvard. So they would have been rich by default anyway. So then measuring that is not a consequence of having attended the college, not for everybody. For somebody, for a small subset, it is. But that small subset is not visible in the data. Whereas what is visible in the data is the selection bias, which is it's a rich institution that produces a lot of rich entrepreneurs, and the wealth of the entrepreneurs is not a factor of the university. At least the data doesn't show that. The wealth is a factor of it being expensive, and the rich families send their rich kids to attend the college where they socialize with other rich people, right? So that is selection bias. If I said, okay, the ROI of going to Harvard is huge because then you become rich, well, that's not actually what the data says. Azim, in this case, Andrew, mentions in his article that there's also a selection bias with Gen AI usage, right? So developers will disproportionately use AI for different tasks. Notably that it seems, and the Dora report also threw a hint, like the Dora report, the LinearB report, and the ThoughtWorks report, which I think it was only mentioned in a blog post on Martin Fowler's blog. They all hinted of AI usages where only the more experienced, let's say smarter or more entrepreneurial developers, those that with 10 plus years of experience, only they see a minor benefit in AI usage. So they selectively use it more, but also more carefully.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody else is essentially vibe coding. They don't know how to code, so they use the AI to just produce lines of code faster than they would have been able to because they don't know how to code. And for them, it is actively harmful. So if you put these two camps in the same bucket, you get data all over the place. And it's hard to say, oh yeah, it's really helpful or it's not helpful. And if you look at it like from a too wide lens without understanding the underlying statistical biases, you might end up just throwing, billions at Gen AI without really anything to show for it. What do you think of this selection bias?
So first of all, I think it's true. So when you now technically see the solution like Claude Code, which is first of all a CLI thing, right? So you have this CLI thing there, and it's pretty fast. So you need to prompt something. That's the first point. You don't prompt like, create me a component. It must be blue. It's not like this. You need to be very precise. In this file, I had the idea that I want to do this.
Adrian, while you're explaining, I will present your video muted in the background so that people can see Claude.
Okay.
And you just continue explaining, please.
Okay. So you basically have that fast-running AI, which you need to prompt correctly. And prompting correctly is somewhat complicated to understand what that really is. So in that demo, what we see right now, my prompts were like a little bit easier. so that I actually do it in production. In production, it's a little bit like I'm writing 2 to 3 to 4 sentences, oftentimes really pointing to specific interfaces or results I want to have. I talk about negative things, a little bit like this I don't want to have. So I'm very, very precise, because we often see AI as a magical thing, which isn't. So you need to talk to the AI like you talk to another peer in a pair programming session. So this is what we want to do. Now we need to execute this. And the AI is actually doing exactly that. So the more you are precise, let's say the better the outcome will be. So in that video right now, we see another additional thing, which is the guidelines. So you need to define guidelines and give Claude
Pre-prompts.
some pre-prompts about the project. What can
So,
you do?
so,
What
so
should
this
you
is
do?
not pre-training. This is inference time pre-prompting. This will always follow into the token window in front of whatever you're
Exactly.
working on.
Exactly. And so that was basically my first day where I was working with that. So I was pretty new in that. Now I'm a little bit, let's say several dollars further now. Let's call it like this. And so what I found out, so this prompting is very complicated, because you really need to be able to express what you want to do to the goal before you actually do that. Very much the same like in TDD, right? And that's the reason why it's actually quite well working with TDD, though in this example we see in the video there is no TDD used, but you can basically use it. And that is what makes it so hard. And when we now follow the video in the background, we will see something very interesting. You will be that there is so much output generated. And if you don't understand, if you cannot grasp what this thing is creating for you, you can actually not execute it, because, well, you are responsible and accountable for the code you produce. And if you can't grasp what there is, then you can't press yes. That's simply what's the case. And that's the big difference with that and vibe coding is Claude Code is an extension of me as a seasoned senior developer with a lot of experience. So in professional sense, more than 2 decades, right? More worth of experience. So I have done a lot of mistakes in my life. I know a lot of things before they actually run. And that was a good example. That thing was actually doing something very similar to me. Instead of going as an AI through 900 files and just fixing them, it was writing a script which is doing it for it. And it was just executing on my computer. That's an advanced pattern, but I need to understand the code which it wants to execute before it executes it, because how else can I grasp, or let's say have a code review inline of 900 files at once?
So what's interesting there is that so Claude is aware of its token window. So when you ask it to do, so this is a very large code base. This is over 100,000 lines of code.
90,000 lines of code.
90,000. Okay, 100,000 for 100,000, give or take. It's a very large project. It's a very old project. So Claude, having determined the context, understands that your ask is so large that it would have to sort of involve the entire code base, and it cannot like reasonably add the entire code base into its token space. It simply doesn't have enough tokens to reason about it simultaneously, right? Like everything at the same time. If you had a different, a more enterprise integration with a custom token window, that would work, but that's very expensive. What it did do, however, if I understand you correctly, is it created a script, but it continued the workflow. So rather than reasoning about all the files, it gave you a script. It had a conversation about you to verify whether the script works correctly, and then maintaining its, let's say, its branch. On the same branch, it also ran the script with you to see if the things got fixed correctly. And then rather than involving the changed files into its token space, they just remained changed, modified files in your open branch, in your active work directory. and then you got the sort of benefit from the script that the AI created for you with your instruction, plus what the script did. But the changes actually weren't performed by Claude. The changes
They
were
were
performed by the
performed by
script.
Claude. Yeah, okay.
No,
that
he
moment
ran the
by
script.
the script.
So Claude ran the script, having
Mhm.
understood that the script is sort of sensible to run, but it didn't reason about the file changes. It sort of had a conversation about you and basically told you, like, Adrian, you need to tell me that this is correct, and if you say yes, then I will run it, and then we can reason about any kind of issues, but I cannot reason about the entire project at the same time. The same way that a human can't. The same way that a human can't look at all 900 files at the same time.
What it does in the end is doing like the compile stuff, like lint, ts build,
Yeah.
and then npm test, right? Running
Yeah.
the component test against it, and then when it sees problems in those things,
It automatically tries to solve them without your help.
in a loop. So
Yeah.
until your loop limit is actually exhausted, there is one. So
Yeah, of
it's
course.
based on the I don't know, some millions of tokens, and then it basically says 4 or something, and basically you need to restart Claude, and then you can just move on. It's just you need to basically restart the session.
So I think it's worth mentioning how Gen AIs work, right? Like, what are tokens? Like, I think that's worth explaining. So there is a very good video by Ilya. I think he was just streaming. It wasn't really meant as a presentation. He just opened up a stream and explained how AIs work. I'm talking, of course, of Ilya Sutskever, one of the OpenAI co-founders. I can't find the video right now, but it's a 2-hour video about Ilya basically explaining, like, just doing a breakdown about how Gen AI works. And what a token is not a character, right? So when I type a word, for example, you have the sentence updated the original. Okay, you have the sentence. Okay, it's moving too fast. So in your prompt, you have all React components should include use client directive at the top. So all would be one token. React would be one token. Components would be one token. Should would be one token. Include would be one token. Use maybe the symbols, use client, and the symbol again up the apostrophe semicolon apostrophe. Directive is a token. At is a token. D is a token. Top is a token. So what it has is a lexer to determine if you type to React uppercase and React lowercase, is that the same token? Like, are we talking about the same concepts, right? So there is like a lexer going on in the background that tries to like semantically link the things you typed, like where are the typos, where are the etc., and then what you say are tokens, and then the response it gives you are also tokens, right? And the way these GPTs work is they remember continuously the entire conversation. So you ask it, you gave it 100 token input, then it gives you a 300 token output. Then you give it a 100 token input again, you prompt it again, and it just keeps moving. It's basically sending itself the entire conversation all the time, right? So if you ask it to do something and it produces 1,000 tokens, those 1,000 tokens will stay in the conversation. Then if you ask it to do something and it produces 10,000 tokens, those 10,000 tokens will stay in the conversation, even if you tell it to forget to forget about the tokens, because it needs to remember the tokens that you told it to forget.
The forgetting thing is a token as well, which then basically it processes basically the stuff before, then it forgets and it processes.
Yeah, and then
straightforward.
But that in itself is also a processing, and it can open up a new conversation, but it's a little bit more complicated. Every Gen AI that I use handles forget something differently. The point is, when you're in a loop, it can quickly balloon out of control. If the outputs that you're receiving are very large, that will very quickly exhaust your token space, right? So if I ask ChatGPT something simple and my question was 10 tokens, but ChatGPT produced 100,000 tokens as a response, if my token limit is 200,000, then I can ask it only one more thing, and then when it corrects itself and it gives me the full output again, it will stop because it will run out of tokens. So it is very easy to hit the token limits once the answers, the GPT's answers become very large. I just wanted to mention this technicality. A lot of our viewers don't understand sort of the distinction between what is a prompt, what is a token, and what do the token limits really mean.
Yep.
So think of token limits as the amount of memory that a GPT can have, like that's its short-term memory. Its long-term memory is the model, and the short-term memory is your conversation. Your conversation never goes into long-term memory, but it can be post-trained, it can be retrained on the new conversations that it has, depending on, sometimes on ChatGPT you get those like two options that it says, hey, which one is the better response? That there you're implicitly being involved in like helping it create a better data set for like retraining the next generation, not this one, but the next generation of the model. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. We were here somewhere in the video.
Mm-hmm.
So you said it kept continuously running linters, prettier, npm test. So you basically those were all in your pre-prompt, and basically it created a script. It ran the script, and then it kept basically. So if I understand you correctly, what continued going into its token space were not the outputs of the files it was changing, because that's too large, but instead the errors from the linters and the tests.
Probably that's in that moment, yes. That's what it was prompting
itself. Yeah, that's what it was prompting itself with in the batch.
Exactly. But it is doing differently when you're actually having, let's say, I want to have a change in this file, I want to create a new file, I want to refactor a file, then it of course processes and finds the files. That's very interesting how it handles that. So if you just have one or two files, it directly searches for it somehow. I don't know exactly how it does it eternally, but if you have something like, oh, I need to actually find this occurrence in all other files and make sure it never happens in any other file, which is very interesting. You do it, I mentioned that in the video, I do it normally with a search in project and have some regex and, find it for myself. It takes, of course, quite a while until you have all those occurrences.
But he can grep.
And it's basically grep. Yeah, that's how it did, instead of basically loading all files into the context. That's what it basically does.
Yeah, so he didn't spend a bunch of tokens for loading the files. He just used your batch prompt to actually do a grep and then look for what you asked it, and then it would use that to sort of narrow down its token window, its context window.
Exactly.
Right. So the big benefit, would you say, is Claude knows how to economically use your shell and your IDE to narrow down its to make its token usage more economical. Like that is one of the key things that are so important about Claude.
Yes. And so that's one of the aspects why it is not for juniors, because what happens in that video when you put that to someone in the bootcamp, it is, in my opinion, pretty impossible to execute.
Yeah, the linter needs to be set up correctly. The project needs to compile. The test needs to be there. The project structure needs to be sensible. It needs to be easy to find things.
So I was reducing the migration time, even though I have reverted the project after that one because I wasn't following in that percentage as I wanted to. So I decided to do it again in basically in full awareness on a weekend or something like that, just because I'm interested into. But I actually spent quite a lot of time, because what that thing is actually doing is my hands-on work, which I would have done very similar. The interesting part was I was actually creating a script like it was doing basically, and I think it was copying the idea of the script. I mentioned that in the video. I wasn't sure about that because I never have tried it without that script, right?
Yeah.
But then it basically followed this path, even though I switched the context from time to time. And it is a very complicated thing to not have just a migration. So let's say the typical migration stuff in Next.js is handled by a mod, right? So code mod, which is done. But we need to have recoil changes. We have a lot of sub-dependency change because of React bump, and those kind of things happen. The recoil needs to go out. We have some issues with the Slate implementation, which isn't used anymore. So we need to switch to TipTap. There are so many. Let's say during the migration, you need to do other migrations as well because we are in the Node world. It is like that, right? And that is what makes it complicated. And the wow thing was that this thing was capable of doing that in a quarter of a time of as I was doing it manually. And I was not really following it. I actually have done some kind of, let's say, I felt like on some point in time, I lost focus on what it's actually doing. So I said, yeah, it doesn't matter now. So you can basically say, don't ask me again, just go ahead until I tell you to stop, right? And then it was actually doing that. And here we see the limitation was reached in the video. That was interesting. So you need to restart that. I was not.
So you reached your token limit, right? So you have
on the bottom right corner, you see that.
Yeah, you have exceeded 200,000 tokens in your contact space.
Exactly. And yeah, so
so your conversation, your code changes went past the equivalent of 200,000 words.
Output, yes. But input, I'm now at 60 million input in my usage thing. I was on 20 something, nearly 30 on day one input in general. So I think.
How much did this conversation cost you?
That conversation, I was writing it down. How much it was? It was the first part was something around $5 to $6, I think. So a total migration. And the interesting point is what I was seeing then in the production spaces as well. There were things when you get used to the prompting and you understand what it actually will do. It is very deterministic actually, and that was quite interesting as well because it does have so much more context than ChatGPT or something like that does have. Right?
Yeah.
So it is more deterministic, and especially when you have good guidelines and a good prompting technique. And I was actually letting this thing do things, and I was writing an email to a client, and then I got back to the screen, and it came to me with the diffs and the explanation. I was quickly going through it. I said, that's actually cool. Pressed enter, go back to the email. I just did another thing, and it came to the next step. I saw errors. I have fixed the errors like this. There was a type error. Let's go ahead, right? You do it like this, and then you get back. Okay, next step. Let's figure out. And you was basically, I was switching between programming and not programming because the machine was actually doing that. And suddenly this some dollars, right, basically made that I could do two things at the same time. That's not 100% multitasking, but task switching very, very effectively without me losing context in the engineering part, because I learned, that's a new learning I never had before, is what actually exhausts me during the development process and what's not. So thinking about the entire solution, thinking about the next steps isn't that hard. It isn't that, let's say, it doesn't force you too much. But what forces you is to actually execute it, find files. Then you have 3 files open. Where was it again? And you need to constantly process those things, and that costs you energy. And what I felt during the development with Claude was, so after that video then, was that it was so much easier. It was relieving for me. So the same results and so much more mental capacity used by myself. And suddenly I said to myself, I don't want to work without that anymore. Next idea is, do I become, or will my skills degrade? That was a question. I haven't solved this question for me. So in the last 20 years, I fixed all bugs myself.
Wait. Wait. When you were done, you said you didn't use the output. You reverted the changes.
Yes, because I said that during the video, I was concentrating on doing the video. I was pressing very often enter, and I had 920 files changed. and I don't want it to make a file. I don't want it to take over 920 files without reviewing them. And what I want to do instead is doing the same again, maybe without a script, looking how that works out, and basically do the same again while being fully aware of what's going on, because it is still a migration. It is way more complicated than actually just creating a new feature, changing something. That's a whole lot difference. Yeah.
So ultimately, will it be saving you time? So if I'm taking the selection bias advice from Azim's and Andrew's article that's linked in chat, then the selection bias would be not just comparing like a plethora of engineers side by side, but like we need to understand which engineers would use AI, and then compare only those engineers who would use AI with their counterparts, with themselves in an alternate universe where AI is not available, right? So you need to sort of, for ROI selection, you need to check, hey, the engineers who do pick UI, what would have been their productivity if they have not picked it, right? So you specifically, you now solve this with AI, with Claude specifically, and then reverted the changes. Would you have done it faster if you had not used Claude to begin with?
No. I have done that a month before with Vite and Next.js, some kind of migrations 2 times at the same time. Each of them cost me around 4 to 5 hours without roughly about the same result. And I was done in an hour something with Claude. So no question.
But you're still not done, right? Like you're not happy. You don't know whether it is correct.
No, actually, I reverted it. So I need to correct myself a little bit. I reverted it because I haven't committed through the video. And I have basically started for the next video with the page router to app migration at the same time. And in that moment, things became a little bit more complicated. And I wasn't able to differentiate between the first type of the migration, or the first stage, and the second stage. And that was the real issue. So I couldn't grasp what was actually now going on. So if I would have not, let's say, I was too focused on the video. That was my problem. So if I would have said, okay, stage 1 is done, I'm reviewing it, I'm committing it. What's that?
You're vibe coding.
I was web coding. That was like it. Yeah. And then then probably the first stage I would have taken. Probably the second I wouldn't, or I would have needed to work more time because there were strange errors in the tests then. So it's a little bit like the SAS loader wasn't working anymore because of NPM updates. And we needed to work on in this trunk-based development, and I needed to do other things, and it was actually for the sake of the video. And I wanted to redo that with enough time on the weekend where I can learn something out of it. So that was the reason why I actually reverted. So because I actually haven't done a good job by committing a stage in between, that was the problem. Yeah. Yeah. But you are correct with the selection bias. So there are so many voices on LinkedIn still who are against that, right? There are so many voices who are even pro vibe coding. I am not pro vibe coding because it is not for me. It won't be for me for quite a long time. And I realized that during cloud coding, because you can actually do you could, this Shadow Whisperer, or how's it called? This tool where you can actually have that coding style of voice over thing into your CLI and other tools.
While we're talking, I looked up so I took some notes on one post in particular. Just want to bring that up on screen. If I can make my chat. I've been very busy on LinkedIn today, so unrelated stuff. You can continue talking. Sorry for interrupting you. But I just wanted to bring this up on the screen. So this is basically Brian Feister, not to be confused with Brian Finster. Brian Feister is an engineering lead at Salesforce, and his post said, AI slop finally hit me in production. Big oversight on my part, and I hit paying customers. ironic that I had mentioned recently that I had to clean up AI slop. I had another engineer on the team who shipped some code 6 months ago, and I missed a critical detail. I'll spare you the details a bit, but the short version is passing nil to an HTTP handler function in Golang is really not a good idea. It throws an internal server error, and it doesn't even show anything useful in the server logs. The problem is that AI accelerates you learning how to slow down and really think through code, and is proposed the new most valuable commodity. So basically what has happened to him is that somebody on his team has used AI to code off some stuff. It looked good. They shipped it, and nobody really, like no human actually really knew or was responsible for the code that hit it. Everybody was sort of like passively responsible for having rushed it. The speed was great. It felt awesome. They went to production, and then realized that the AI made a mistake, and then they sort of didn't know which human to attribute.
There's a lot wrong there. There is a lot of wrong there. So first of all, the question should be asked beforehand or afterwards. Would that happen actually if that person was writing it itself, maybe oversee that detail and then go to production, right?
This was the first question. Eric asked, how is your team's PR process? How does critical oversights happen with PRs and test engineers? He says, no test engineers, and I reviewed the PR and missed it.
So it would happen with or without AI. That's what
I agree.
there.
I agree. Yes.
So nothing to do with AI. So
well, now here's the thing, right? So let's assume there is selection bias here. Hang on, let me put the article on screen while we talk. So let's assume there is selection bias. If there is selection bias, we now need to ask this team with AI, if this team in particular, having wanted to choose AI, if the AI was unavailable, would they have committed the same mistake? So yes, if the code was written, they would have reviewed it the same. But if the human was writing it instead of an AI, would the author in the alternate universe with no AI usage, would the author have missed it? That's what we should really be asking ourselves. Yes, if you missed it in review, you'll miss it in review. If the code is there, you'll miss it regardless of who wrote it. But a human would have been involved with writing it, and I would stipulate that the likelihood of the human, the author, catching it would have been higher if AI wasn't used. So it was AI related. If my assumption is correct.
I have another way of seeing that. So what I saw during working with Claude Code was that Claude Code often told me, hey, that part will cause problems. Shall we fix it as well? So, and you could use Claude Code not only for generative code, but for analyzing code as well. So Brian could have used basically AI to ask about the current PR it's working. And you could probably, there would be a chance if you would use Claude Code that it would find. So I don't know Golang, but in passing nil to HTTP whatever, I don't know exactly what that means, but it sounds for me like a standard if it's not a good idea, and how he was actually phrasing it.
So
there would be a good chance that I would.
It's possible that the happy path was working and that it was test covered, but somewhere a delegate was allowed to be null and the null wasn't checked for.
Yeah, but so it sounds for me that this error normally don't happen because the team is used to don't do these kind of mistakes because they know, and suddenly they use something which might not know it yet because it was never taken into the context, right? So you need to add those things into the context.
Yeah, this is something you would have to explicitly prompt for to say, hey, like if there's any delegates involved, like don't let them dangle. Like,
but for me, it is the very same thing as getting a very new seasoned engineer on the team.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
And so if you get,
if you onboarded a junior, you would have to instruct them not to do this, because otherwise. But if you know that they would need instructing to do this, then you should be actively looking for this in PR review. So it's safe to say that this has never happened to them. So they also wouldn't know how to instruct the junior engineer.
Yeah, because PRs is an iterative approach, which means that when you see problems happening, especially when problems pass a PR and will be found in production and called by someone else or your Sentry or whatever, then you actually use that as a feedback and put that back into some form of we can't do that guideline, and it would be the usage of AI as well put into that form of guideline to make sure that never happens again, and that is what is actually missing here. So for me, it is
What if they were
simply
pairing?
what?
So Brian
Yeah.
is obviously. So there was an engineer who used AI,
Yeah.
and Brian was his manager or his engineering lead. And what if Brian and this engineer were pairing while they were using the AI? Right? To basically not pair with the AI, but just two developers pairing as you normally would, but have like something like Claude generate the code underneath.
Well, that's a hypothetical question, right? It depends on, first of all, the person, where's to focus on. Is Brian in that moment fascinated from Claude like I was in the first video?
Yeah.
Or was he already used to it like a tool and is focusing actually on the code? That's the first question, which I would now ask. Can you follow? So when you work with Claude, and you saw that in my video, so when I do it in production, what I see is it is not vibe coding. It is really telling you every step which will be changed now in a very detailed way with explanation. So if you take your time and go over it and through it and analyze it like you would have written it yourself, then you are still faster, because typing is simply something we are not very fast in as humans, and
Agreed.
the reviewing, and then you would have actually less problems there. So the person who was using the AI, and the question would be what type of AI was it actually, but if it would be something like Claude Code, then I would say that definitely it is the fault of the engineer who was prompting, because he could have seen that. And
I mean, I don't want to make.
well.
I don't even want to make this a discussion of blame. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you're as a team, you're still responsible for whatever the AI produces, regardless of individual blame. Like, I wouldn't blame the individual.
No, it's not about individual blame. It's about when you ask when to spot the error, right? And
so
yeah,
what I saw from your discussion, from having partially gone through your video, what I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I saw predominantly is that it encouraged a large batch size. Like, there was that moment where you got really excited. Oh, I'm making a lot of progress. And then like the batch size got out of control. And then you reverted it because the batch size was large.
Yeah.
Do you think this could have been a factor with this situation? I know you don't have insight, but do you speculate that if the risk of batch sizes getting out of control is a constant pressure with Gen AI assisted coding, and normally, like in a universe where Gen AI doesn't exist, where GPTs don't exist, I'm in business as a coach because engineers already struggle with keeping the batch sizes short. So even a human working with another human, and the only smart machine it's using is a compiler in IDE, even that setup results in very large batch sizes, and people need they need help to figure out that they should really be aiming for much, much smaller batch sizes, because then if something goes wrong, they can, like, the wrongness of where in the code something went wrong, it can only be attributed to the batch that went wrong, not to the person who did it. Like, that's not important. The batch is the important factor. This commit made it go haywire. If the batch sizes are large, it becomes almost impossible to to roll back commits. So if this risk is there, would you recommend Claude outside of like TCR even, or TDD style?
TCR? I don't know what is.
TCR is TDD on steroids. TCR is if the test is green. So TCR is TDD, but when the test is green, it makes a commit. And if the test is red, it rolls back the code.
Oh, I don't know that.
So
Sounds like the Dark Souls version of TDD.
Yes, so it's more like a hardcore version, like a single life version of TDD, where you're basically getting a dopamine kick for not speculating, right? So I think this is correct now, and you say, I think this is correct now. If your guess was wrong, it rolls back the code because the workflow is basically telling you you were wrong. You changed 4 lines of code and you were wrong. So you don't understand it as well as you thought it would. So next time do 2 lines, please.
Yeah,
And
that's actually good to actually keep quality and not leaving bad, let's say, bad changes in which degrade the quality over time, because you then work instead of reverting, you basically try to fix the problems you have just introduced. I think that's the idea behind that. What would it be with? So your question was, would TDD? I'm sorry, repeat the question, please.
the risk is large batch sizes. You do vibe coding with Claude, batch sizes increase because you get super excited about how much you can get done in the same amount of time. But then would you like pre-prompt it to like continuously commit what it's doing to keep the batch sizes small?
I actually
You
have
just
done that, so it is actually committing that in a specific style. I even was written like how we basically do that, and that's the reason why I often prompt with the ticket number as well, because the ticket number is part of our commit, and it was for the sake of the video. I said that in the beginning of the video and during the video, oftentimes. And I was seeing that it was a good idea to say that because it wasn't actually working out. The large batch sizes are very, especially when it's different tasks, in one batch. That's very bad. So if it's just
but
the
that's
same
what batch
thing,
sizes are. But like it can be one task that wasn't split up enough, or it can be
exactly.
two
So
small tasks put
changing
together.
900 files and
one.
adding a directive in the top of the file is not a large batch size for me just because there are 900 files, because it is very easy to review in that moment, right? Or to grasp if it's now right or wrong. And if you have tests, it's actually working, right? But it is, of course, different when you do that and you go for exchanging some form of what was it doing? It was doing like the router was changing as well, and those kind of things. And that is then more complex to do. And yes, you should basically have one prompt should be one commit. That is a rule of thumb without further thinking. Of course, more experience, right? But one prompt, one commit could make sense. So let's say a one family of prompts, which means that if you prompt something and you need to reprompt, it may be the same batch, but as soon as this task is done, go to the next step and have a new commit. It makes sense.
The reason I asked about TCR specifically is because it can be very useful to lock down yourself or the AI, in this case, the GPT, into what hat it is wearing, right? So if the test and the code being written are both in the context window, with ChatGPT, for example, it's almost impossible to tell it to do 3D because it'll define a test and then it'll start hallucinating. And when it's time to do the implementation, sometimes it changes the test as well. And I don't want that. And when I prompt it not to change the test, sometimes it starts hallucinating. Oh yeah, you're right. Oh, now
the test is failing. Let's fix the test.
Yeah, now it's hard to implement. I'm going to change the test so it passes.
Oh.
But that's a typical machine move. A human would not do that because it cannot do both. It cannot reason about both problems at the same time.
No, the human would put skip into the test instead.
Or the human would skip the test. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And we see this in chess as well, right? And you said that you did commit on every step with Claude, but I imagine at some point those commits became machine commits. Like they didn't resemble commits that a human would make. And we see this in chess as well when there are like machine moves, where there is no plausible logical move. Logical moves are, for example, I might simplify chess as don't move the same piece twice in the opening, or go for the center, or make sure you're opening up all the pieces so you get them into play. So you move them, everything basically except the pawn chain, you move outside of its default position to activate them on the board. That would be anthropomorphized, like the entire solution space, which is enormous for chess, into a few rules that a human can follow. And this following these rules just gets you up to average or slightly above average rating in chess, right? And then these principles are so solid, solid, not to be confused with solid principles, but these principles are so solid that even grandmasters can follow them, so the best players can follow them. And sometimes you're very early on in the game and you have been trapped by a very clever move, and there is no optimal solution. So where in chess, when I started seeing this, and Go does this as well, the Go game, I think that was one of the, I think Blue Sky, no, it was one of the Go, Go AlphaGo, I believe, the precursor to ChatGPT, actually. It started displaying this behavior of, there are, normally a human would have been unable to find a logical move, so it makes a move that is like plausibly neutral, or it's sort of trying to make a move that it can sort of reason out a benefit from that doesn't lead to a draw. But the machine started doing something else. The machines, because they can process much further, they started doing machine moves, and later on in analysis, in like the AI analysis, they have determined that, as far as they can tell, the machine made a move that is much more likely, because there was no good move. It made a move that is most likely to bait the opponent into making an error. Right? So, and that was sort of the first branching of, oh yeah, that was definitely a machine move, or no, this is just a safe human move. And we saw this as well with when OpenAI for Dota, I think they had a Dota 2 tournament. It would sometimes do like these weird machine moves where it would like drop an item. It would drop an item onto the floor because it could prompt the opponent to misclick the item instead of your hero, right? So if it was desperate and it was no open moves, that is a move that a human would not do. But the AI said, okay, there's no other moves here, so let's do the move that would bait the opponent into making a mistake.
Yeah.
And those machine moves are not replicable by humans. They seem silly. And I think that's the risk that we run into when we go into these Claude-assisted workflows, where at a certain point it'll just bait you into saying, okay, well, what do I need to tell Adrian to hit yes? Because at this point there's no good move, just let me keep rolling. Right?
But I think that is what ChatGPT was doing all day long. When I ask it, it always comes up with some. There was always something in the box, right?
And I can feel that. I can feel that moment of, okay, no, stop. We're spinning in circles. You're hallucinating. We're spinning in circles.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm wasting my time talking to you.
That is what
I had that feeling very often.
I have never had that with Claude Code so far. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but Claude Code is working differently. Something behind that. Maybe it changes as well, but that was simply my observation. I remember just one time when it was producing somehow something where it tries to invent an interface while the interface was existing. So it wasn't able to grasp that the interface was basically an interface which was in some way or the other inherited from some other thing, and it wasn't seeing that. Instead, it was creating something. The interesting part was in the next step, he was realizing that and saying, "Oh, I need to fix it. That was wrong." It's a little bit like that. Yeah. So it tries to. The AI itself, in its process loop, fixes its own shortcomings, which makes it so extremely important to have a good structure, to have good tests, and make sure that whatever you do, it is at least test covered. and you need to follow it. So it doesn't make sense. This is the reason why I said vibe coding is not for me. Vibe coding would be like you don't see that exactly what the AI is doing. You just believe it's correct. So vibe coding is not working in my opinion, in a hybrid situation, which means that hybrid means humans and the machine is working together, especially not humans and machines. So that's still another thing. So if multiple AIs work. Vibe coding may be working in very small projects, very easy projects, with only one AI is actually the engineer. And you are the person dreaming something together. That's how I call it. That may be working for some very simple cases. Maybe in the future for more complex cases when technology evolves, yes, of course. But today, no. Sorry, no. It's what I see there is not very different, right? And it simply doesn't work yet. As an extension for you as a human being, yes, it's good. You can do that, but not, and definitely not as a standalone. Just let things do, because I felt very bad. I really have to say that when I was not following the prompt, I become more uncomfortable, basically inductive. Every time
because you see a large batch, you don't understand what's going on, and then you're tempted to analyze everything. It's 900 changed files. You don't know what's going on.
Yes, and I'm too experienced to just pass it through. I know that it's stupid, dumb. I can't accept that. And that's one of the reasons I think where junior developers then struggle, because they simply cannot review what they do. And they have then the tendency to say, oh, vibe coding sounds so great. It does it all for me. Yes, but in a real production environment where things count and you don't know and you don't have access to, let's say, fine-grained fixes. Let's say Cloud Code isn't able to fix something, then you need to be able to.
Any reasonable doubt is cause for rejecting a PR.
Yeah. And
if you know the branch enough, right? But the problem is, if you never read the branch, you also have no plausible cause for rejecting it. So, if branches were auto-merged after a time limit, you would create the incentive that, if I ignore it, it basically just becomes vibe coding, right? But if it has to go through a human, I also don't want the size, the batch sizes where, because with the mistake baiting behavior of machine moves, I would be concerned with the bias of, well, what if Claude just gave me a stupid answer? Because it's confident that with my help, it can fix it in like 7 prompts. But what if I don't have time to fix it? What if I don't have the patience to fix it?
I'm quickly
because
we are over time and I actually need to go because I have an appointment today.
Okay.
So I have a recommendation, or I have an idea. Let's say we have done a TDD hands-on session some month ago with other people, like this TDD thing where multiple engineers were participating. I would like to redo this one with Cloud Code.
So you and I pairing, and there's a hot join, and we're using Cloud.
Exactly. Cloud Code is the coder, and we are basically the teller, right? And we tell Cloud Code is doing, and we see how well. So you are a TDD coach professional. I am just a practitioner. So it would be interesting to see especially we should get some people who are against AI into the session as well, to have a hot discussion about that.
I agree.
Let's discuss that after the show tomorrow, and have a date for that 2 weeks in advance, or something like that special maybe, and let's go for that one. That could be interesting too. We should plan 2 hours for that.
Okay.
I pay the cloud.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Adrian, huge thanks for your video and for your cloud experimentation. And you brought this topic primarily to my attention, so you were super excited. So I was happy to jump on it. Our live viewers, thank you for being with us. We'll see us again next week, same time, same place. And I'll do the outro. Take care. Ciao.
Goodbye.